Welcome to the Tech Story Podcast, the place where we interview founders and people from tech who are building and working in very exciting tech companies. Today, I'm very excited to welcome Tom Lawrence on the show. Tom is the founder and CEO of MVPR, a platform which is automating PR. Tom, thank you
Thanks.
for taking the time for being with us. Would you mind sharing a bit of background about yourself and the story behind MVPR?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me on. So the background is reasonably simple. I've been in PR for nearly 10 years, worked at a number of different kinds of agencies. And then in 2018, after I finished working on my first company, I was pulled into it again. And I went to work for Edelman, which is the largest PR company in the world. And we built their offering for startups from scratch. They'd tried it a few times before, and it hadn't really ever worked out. And then, they brought myself and Camille, who's actually just joined me, in to see how we could build a service offering for companies, early stage companies. And we kind of just felt our way, to be honest. And we slowly but surely built an offering for kind of early stage startups. But we spoke with, spoke with close to 1,000 companies in 2 years. And Edelman's brand was such that as soon as we started talking about doing PR for startups, everybody came through the door. And so, Edelman is maybe the premium PR agency globally, and we had a sort of starting price, which is about 15K a month, which is kind of unaffordable for anybody that hasn't raised more than 25 million and above. And so we rejected a lot of companies, and we naturally worked with scale-ups, but it didn't stop us from speaking with all of the startups and learning about what they needed. And it was off the back of that I decided to build MVPR, which caters towards that market. And when you've worked with as many companies and startups and as many journalists as we did, you learn that actually journalists don't really want to be speaking with PRs anyway. They want to be talking with founders. And that means that you're always in this really awkward situation where the journalist doesn't really want you to be there. The founder is happy you being there, but doesn't know that the journalist really wants to speak to you in the first place. And so as an agency, you're kind of gatekeeping this relationship. And unless you're offering anything above that, it's an unsustainable model. And so left to essentially connect companies with the right journalists, and give them access. So that's what we built with MVPR.
That's really interesting. As a startup that tries to do PR, we definitely tried to do it ourselves, and then we eventually found you and use your platform. I can definitely see how you help and how you've helped us, and great media placements, which has been really helpful. Thank you. For, I guess, early stage startups, what are the things that they need to be aware of when thinking about PR? And for example, how would MVPR help them?
So basically what we've built is, we automate how companies get written about in the press. And to do that, we have built a two-sided marketplace. You've got companies that want to share content on one side and journalists that want to find it on the other. And everybody knows that journalists receive hundreds of emails a day and they struggle to filter their inboxes. And yet there's this PR kind of world that's kind of perpetuating that problem. And that's because no one really understands what journalists want to receive. And if you do, it's kind of this information. That's why PR is such a black box. You always think, okay, what shall I reach out to this journalist with? What do they want to receive from me? And so what we do is we analyze what journalists are writing about. We do 90 days trailing of analysis of everything they write. And we pull out the very, very granular topics that they have been writing about and use that to infer what they will want to be writing about in the future. And because we have that information from one side, and we also have the company content from the other side, we're able to matchmake really effectively. And so on the one hand, it's about making that connection and facilitating it, allowing companies to reach out to journalists on their own. But it's also about providing them with the data that helps them understand what they should pitch. And even, what times in the week, what times in the day, specifically which journalists at which publications are writing about what that would be relevant to them. Because nearly always whenever I speak with founders, you typically know what you want to write about, but you're not necessarily sure always with who or what they want to hear from you. And I find that founders tend to think in publications. So you'll always think, oh, I want to be into tech. I want to get into TechCrunch, or I want to get into Forbes. But PR people might know that Forbes has 150 contributors that all write on a various number of different topics. Now, if you pitch a Forbes contributor that writes about fintech companies, something to do with the health tech space, they're not going to be interested in, and because they don't have any time, they're not going to give you feedback either. So you're not going to learn for the future which ones you should pitch. And so, yes, it's about facilitating the exchange, but it's also about educating companies on what they need to share so that they can do it themselves.
So you're creating the news.
I wish we were creating the news. No, readers create the news.
Yeah.
It's ultimately a journalist is only beholden to their readers. They are they're effectively, to an extent, a gatekeeper for their readers. And for companies, I think the thing that companies often miss is that they often think that you have to kind of brute force your way into a readership. Now, but if you look at the readership of the publication, or perhaps the specific readership of that journalist at that publication, and you look at your own customers and your own ICP, your own ideal customer profile. Now, if you're able to match up your own ICP, your customer profiles, with the readership that journalist is writing for, there's a really good chance that journalist will be interested in knowing about you as a company, especially if you're a similar sized company to companies they've written about in the past. And so actually understanding what a journalist is going to write about and making sure that you're pitching the right journalist has very much to do with you as a company and your understanding of your own market, and who you're going to sell into.
That's really interesting. I guess one thing that I often hear from whether it's journalists or PR agencies when sharing feedback to startups about what they need to do to grab their attention, one thing they tend to say is that the news needs to be, although the content needs to be newsworthy, which I find, unless you're a rocket ship going at 1,000,000 miles per hour or something bad is happening at your startup, it's really difficult, I find, to create that news. So based on what you've just described of locating the ICP, the readership, and then matching the journalists to, identifying the journalists using, for example, a platform like MVPR, are they still looking for news, or how do you sort of create news which isn't necessarily newsworthy from the generic point of view, but maybe is for that journalist writing for that audience?
So there are lots of different kinds of content that journalists write. And so what you're talking about is kind of breaking news, whereby it's typically about a trend or a topic, or something's come out from like the government's released regulation, which means that everyone has to abide by these new rules. And you'll have journalists within a publication that specifically write just about breaking news. So somebody like, we've just released a report and we've just talked about Dan Taylor in that. Dan writes a lot of breaking news. He wrote something like a crazy number of articles, like 250 articles in a 3-month period. And that's because a lot of that is about, funding announcements, things that are breaking, are time dependent. Amy O'Brien doing a lot at the moment about regulation, and that's also the trending topics. But then you also have content that's not necessarily breaking, but is still valuable. So you have things like profile pieces on specific companies. You have things like thought leadership pieces or opinion pieces, and those can be about a specific vertical, or they can be about some piece of regulation and your perspective on it. But they can also be about like horizontal topics as well that we would call them evergreen. So things like how to grow culture as a remote company, things that are applicable to most companies, that as a founder, often you have the authority and credibility to actually comment on. And so that's kind of, again, kind of down the thought leadership side of things. You have interviews, you have podcasts. You often have opportunities to actually pitch publications, analysis that you've done. So it would be really interesting for you, for example, to look at trends in data across contracts, for example. you could take that to a legal technology publication who would be interested in that data and information because it would be valuable for their readers. And so when you're thinking about getting into the news, it's about thinking about the kind of content and kind of information that you have. And then ultimately you need to know who within that publication is responsible for those different kinds of content. And that's often something that founders or companies never know anyway. So doing your research on who is, what a commissioning editor job title means in a publication means versus a reporter, or what a content planner, or etc. Like what those job titles means really is actually really valuable, because it will give you an indication as to what kind of content they're interested in, and subsequently like make you more successful in actually pitching them.
Yeah, no, that's good insight. I guess, yeah, founders tend to just think on the breaking news, but actually there's so much more.
On the newsworthy side of things, I think there are some core, I would say, markers that you'll see in newsworthy content. Sort of localization is one. So how local is the information that you're sharing? So for example, if you're pitching a journalist in London, rather than one that's based on like reporting on Europe, they're like UKTN, for example, UK-based technology companies. They're predominantly interested in writing about UK companies. If you talk about a company that's based in, say, France, for example, that's launching into the UK, they're less likely to be interested in that than a company that's based in the UK, obviously doing something like expanding into different regions in the UK. So how local? There are a number of other markers like are there interesting people attached with that news that will pull in more readers? You have sort of urgency as well. So is there a timeline on it? Is there a current trend, for example, that's like kicking off? There are a number of different things I can share with you afterwards. Actually, like, there's almost like a list that you can just go through and be like, okay, does it meet this criteria?
Looking forward to seeing the list, and
Sure.
I think our biggest challenge right now, just for being in the news, is just bandwidth. But yeah, that's something that we're addressing.
No, it's an interesting point, right? I think when we saw that in advance of Christmas, we saw that across all of our companies. It was one of the biggest challenges that we had, and then obviously GPT-3, was it 3? Yeah, it was GPT 3.5 came out before Christmas, and actually it solved a huge number of problems for us in terms of how quickly companies can create content.
Yeah,
I think the challenge is using it in the right way.
Yeah,
and so creating an article from scratch using GPT-4 and being like, look, this is the context as a legal tech company. I want this to be written from the perspective of the founder. This is kind of roughly what I want to say. Go and write it for me, is not very useful. And you'll end up with generic content. But if you feed it in the right way, and it's really down to like the prompts that you feed it, and we've done a lot of experimentation on this, and we have really honed it down to like something that's incredibly valuable. You can feed it all of the context and all of the information that it would need in order to write you a really, really strong outline. It's good at doing things like pulling stats in from different places so that you don't have to do it so quickly. It's good at, obviously assimilating information. It's also really useful for research purposes. So if you're writing a piece and you're like, you want to ask all of those, like, those questions that you have in your mind, like, is this the right way to write this terminology? Easy. It will give you the context for it, and so you can pull it in there. But the whole purpose of, I would say, of getting the best out of it is actually, it's about creating an outline first that then you can complete as a human. Because, if you're pulling stuff directly from the internet, it's not original. And it probably means it's not going to be valuable as a result.
No, in almost every single episode we've talked about ChatGPT.
Probably, right? Yeah.
Because it's definitely creating noise for all of us. And I don't know if you saw, but Sam Altman is doing a tour around the world, and he's going to meet users, customers, whatever. And I signed up for his London meetup. but I don't know
Nice.
if I'll get a spot. But
I'm sure you will.
who knows? Who knows?
You'll have to have him on the podcast.
Yeah, I'll say, hey Sam, why don't you just come on the podcast? But yeah, and I guess started the company 3, 4, less
Less than 2 years ago.
less than 2 years ago. Wow.
Yeah.
So I guess what's been your favorite moment so far?
My favorite moment so far. I mean, first customer is pretty special, right? Yeah, we had our first customer when we didn't have a product yet. We had a Notion page which was dressed up as our product. Yeah, and we charged them £40 a month. They're our first ever customer. This was in April 2021. We started building the product in April 2021. And yeah, I think my second favorite moment came about a month after that when the founder, this will never happen again, but the founder messaged me and he was like, I don't think you're charging us enough for basically what we were receiving. We think you should double it. And so I doubled it to £80 a month, and we obviously doubled our monthly revenue. So that was.
And then he asked you to double it again.
Oh no! Well, I mean, we've yeah. It's interesting, right? Our base price is now 8 times what it was when we started.
Yeah.
Which is yeah, crazy. Just shows you how much you get wrong in the early days. But we were looking for customers at the time, and yeah, who knows if they hadn't told us that we should double our pricing, maybe we'd still be charging £40 a month.
Yeah. Damn it, no. But,
Yeah,
but no, I think we've gone through a similar process as well of charging £10 per contract, and ultimately it was great to get early adopters feedback, but actually the product and value that we create is worth a lot more than that, and so we have increased our prices, and it's something which obviously might mean that you're out of budget for some of those early customers, but ultimately I think we're building a business, and for the business to survive, you need to have a business model which works and scales, and also justifies the amount of effort you put into the customer and the product. And yeah, I think we've definitely given some of those £10 customers, the VIP white glove, experience.
But you do.
We have to, and we do. But there's sometimes also the customers who complain the most, and that's, I guess, something else to manage when you're building an early stage company.
To be honest, it's the bit that I like the most.
Yeah.
And maybe I've sort of like sadistically trained myself to enjoy it, but yeah, I love it when customers complain about your product.
Yeah.
If they didn't care, they would just churn, right?
Yeah,
They'd
that's right.
They'd do the equivalent of quiet quit, and they'd they'd unsubscribe and they'd leave.
Yeah.
But when they complain about the product, and they're like, oh, I really wish it would do this, or there's a you send me bug requests all the time. Like, there's by the way, there's a there's another one. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I love it. I'm like, oh, tell me more.
Yeah.
Tell me more. And I mean, ultimately, yeah, your customers are only going to tell you how to build the product. And it's up to you how much you decide, like how much you listen to them versus the vision that you have in your mind.
Yeah, no, it's a constant battle, but I agree. If the customers aren't complaining, that's in itself a problem. Saying that you don't complain about our product, maybe there's a problem there.
I'm not sure there is. I would be pretty forthcoming with my.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, I mean, as a founder, you like, I obviously value bug feedback is my favorite kind of feedback, right?
No, absolutely. And I guess so.
Also love it, by the way, when you tell me that the UI is looking really nice.
Well,
was that you? I think I can't remember.
Okay. Well, no, we actually just redid our front end, rebuilt it from scratch, completely changed the UX, UI. Lots of things that we thought make sense don't make sense, and we found out through our customers. But yeah, I mean, if you have time after this, I'd love to show you the new version.
Yeah, we'd love to. I think it was me that was pushing you to increase your prices.
Yeah, well,
as a customer.
Well, we can have a conversation about that as well.
Am I on the legacy?
You're on the legacy.
Am I?
Yeah.
Oh, perfect. I love it.
Yeah. Great. Cool. Well, and I guess what you should know before starting MVPR?
What do I wish I would have known before I started?
Yeah.
Yeah, honestly, I think the thing that I've come to realize in the last, especially like 3 or 4 months, is how valuable your founder's network is. I think before, when I had a previous startup before this, and I didn't come from the startup world. And so everyone always tells you, oh, you need to build your network. And you think, okay, well, yeah, obviously I need to build my network. But with who? And I think the natural tendency is, oh, I need to build my network with investors, or I need to focus on building my network with developers, and you should always be doing those things. But I think the thing that is like, I think massively underestimated, maybe by a lot of really early stage founders, is how valuable your peers are. Because now I feel like the kind of peer group that we're part of is like coming up together, and we're all experiencing stuff that's the same. Some of us are like, further ahead than others, but also behind in other areas of the business. You nearly always have like the same issues, but applied to different industries. And so, yeah, it feels really powerful having such a strong cohort of people that are, combination of bootstrap companies versus companies that have raised VC rounds at, seed and Series A and beyond. And then knowing that you could draw on that advice. I wish someone had told me that in my previous business. Just, focus on your founder network. Like build a really, really strong cohort of peers. Because, yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean,
ultimately you learn from them. Yeah,
that's how we met, and
true.
I agree. I mean, I think that's one thing that I wish I'd known, and I think for me it was more that I found being a solo founder quite lonely, and meeting other founders was a great way of having peers who have gone through similar challenges or can sort of share feedback. But I agree, the network is something which is really valuable, not for the sake of building the network, but more in terms of finding the problems. And I think it even goes beyond just founders. One thing that we always tell our team is like operations, find your peers, marketing, sales, find your peers, because ultimately everyone it's not that we're doing the same thing, but chances are someone has experienced your problem at some point and can maybe share some tips in terms of how you can be better, or how you can continue to grow.
Yeah, that is one of the privileges. That's for sure.
Yeah, great. And in a other life, I remember you told me you were training to be a chef or a sous chef.
That was over a decade ago, but yes.
So how well, how did that happen, or what? Yeah, how did that happen? But also, is there anything from being a chef that has influenced your style of being a founder, or
Yeah, having like 12 things on the go at once, trying to work out like, which dishes had to be ready for your head chef in time that you didn't mess up his dishes. Yeah, he was, to be fair, he was great. But how did I get into it? I love cooking and still do. Yeah, trained when I was 18. I thought I wanted to be a chef. I've loved cooking for a really long time. I lived by myself in London during the last couple of years of my school. My parents were in Amsterdam, and yeah, got into cooking a lot then, and then trained, and then worked in a kitchen in the year after that. I left school, thinking maybe let's try this out, see if it works, and I loved it, but it's impossible to sleep afterwards. So yeah, not sleeping is maybe another thing that yeah, but yeah, I mean it's just it's such an adrenaline fueled yeah, occupation to have. You always end up working really, really late, long hours on your feet all the time. It's incredibly intense. You have this mental timer in your head of literally that's like going on everything. So you're working, you've got like 4 minutes for something. You've got like 3 dishes you're working on yourself. That's for you, like 8 that's for other people. And when you have like, I don't know, covers, like, I don't know, 100, 120 covers in an evening. Yeah, it's pretty intense. And I realized that I also don't like cooking other people's recipes.
Mm.
Yeah. I like cooking my own recipes or recipes that I find cooking like someone else's way of doing something for, yeah, ad continuum wasn't that tempting. But I still love cooking. And yeah, I cook a lot. And so what did I learn? Just to be honest, yeah, resilience probably. And then, yeah, how to have lots of things going on at the same time and you to keep some semblance of reality. But it was really fun, really, really fun.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I wish I knew how to cook. I mean, I guess my founder food, especially in the
Maybe
early
I can
days.
reciprocate and we can have a podcast. I live with a food photographer
Oh,
for
really?
yeah. When I lived in Berlin, I lived with a friend who was a food photographer, and yeah, and he would often do shoots in our kitchen.
Wow.
Yeah, that was fun. So we'd have a similar setup, but in a kitchen, and you and I, it'd be like the worst version of
Yeah.
Saturday Kitchen Live ever, just you and me.
Oh,
Yeah, trying to make yeah.
spaghetti bolognese.
We'll do ragu. We'll do ragu.
Okay,
Yeah.
ragu. Fair enough. Great. No, thanks for the insight. And yeah, really interesting. And I can definitely see the parallels between working in a high intensity environment in a kitchen and being a founder. At least you can't burn yourself or chop a finger off.
Well, not too many times
Literally.
anyway. Yeah.
Yeah.
We should do a founders like cooking session. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I don't know what the turnout would be, but I'm sure.
I think it'd be pretty strong.
Yeah. Well, it all comes down to PR. But and I guess yeah, back to PR and MVPR. What's the vision for the next 3-5 years?
Yeah, so I mean, ultimately, we want to become the largest content marketplace for company content. And I can see a moment in time when, so we also work with a number of publications, we work with a lot of journalists, and by working with both, I think we put ourselves in a really, really strong position. We get to learn more and more and more what journalists want to write about. And ultimately, we're beginning to see how readers are engaging with that content as well. And so, yeah, I see us as a content distribution essentially, but to all publications. At the moment, we're focused on the tech space and the startup space, and that makes a lot of sense. But we will soon move into the consumer space, yeah, and a number of other verticals that exist, and obviously also internationally as well. So that's the plan.
Really,
Yeah.
really exciting, and yeah, I can definitely see how in time you're learning more about your journalists, more about your companies, and then ultimately, I know you said readers are creating the news, but you will, I guess, be creating the news if you have all that understanding, which is really exciting.
Yeah, I hope so. I think everyone's beholden to a reader's attention. I think it's really interesting the way that readers are consuming information now. If you look at the way that if you look at the way that you or I, for example, or like actually read the news or find out about things, it's usually in really small communities. And so what's happening is this kind of like, yeah, disintermediation of the news, and it's filtering down into lots and lots of different social networks. And I think that's very interesting. And so, yeah, I think I'm looking forward to seeing what we can do, especially because I don't think we're quite there yet, but I think we're fast approaching a moment where people want to know, like, how factually accurate is the article that I'm reading. And the interesting thing about the way that we collect information now is we are collecting that information in a way that is traditionally double sourced, so basically verified across two sources, and means that it can actually be like verified and checked in its use over time. And so I think one of the things I'm also excited for is a moment where it becomes a prerequisite that content has that kind of like almost like a watermark that it's factually accurate, and we'll be in a position to actually be able to provide that. And when you can break the individual piece of information down like we can, it also allows us to place that information programmatically. So there at the moment, if you look at the publications that are experimenting with AI in the newsroom, for example, AI in the newsroom is about sourcing information. And I'm excited for a moment in time where we are ready to deliver content directly into the newsroom, but API to API rather than necessarily via the platform and into journalists. And then for that publication to know where that information came from and how factually accurate it was. So yeah, that's something I think will happen in the next 3 to 5 years. Let's see.
No, it's really exciting, and I think around the obviously with the AI content being well, now that it's so easy to create content with AI and there being so much content, one reason why we decided to switch the podcast to in person and high quality was also to sort of differentiate ourselves and make sure that this is content produced by real humans that exist, that are real, and not just some AI. Because I think that's something that I think, as you said, readers want to know where the information came from. Was it from a human? Was it from an AI? And is this information even correct? So great. And as a tech founder, and you're on the tech story, I imagine you use quite a few tech products. So what's your favorite tech product? I know we were talking about the Whoop earlier, and I understand that's not your favorite tech product, but what's your favorite tech product?
Are we talking like SaaS, or are we talking?
It could be SaaS, hardware.
Interesting. I mean, I'm really enjoying using Asana at the moment.
Really?
Yeah, I know. Bizarre pick. A strange pick. I think, yeah, it's looking at the way that we, balance, tasks that happen within the team. I have genuinely been enjoying using it. But if I look at, I don't know, the tech stack, did we talk about Cloudara the other day?
Yes.
Is that you and me?
Yes, because our payments are declined. And I was trying to reassure you that there is money, just not in Cloudara.
No, but it's funny. As soon as you start using a product like that, you begin to realize how many subscriptions you have and which ones are valuable and which ones are not. So on the SaaS side of things, I've actually really enjoyed putting a lot of process behind all of the work that we do, putting infrastructure behind our sales process and our marketing processes, and now we have more people, so we can actually do that. And it's not just me. So that's actually been, I mean, oddly really fun. For me personally, on the tech side of things, like consumer tech. I actually don't really have anything that I really love. There is plenty of things that work for me and do things for me. But yeah, depressingly, I can't. Nothing like springs to mind immediately. I like my watch, but it tells me the time, and it no longer needs to tell me what my blood sugar is, because I've got my Whoop. Hopefully in the future telling me that. Not quite. We'll get there.
Interesting. I mean, Asana. What I've noticed with various products like Asana that have been around for some time is when I tried them maybe 5 years ago, I just really didn't like them, and that's definitely something I felt about Notion. Somehow in the past couple of months I've been using Notion and actually really enjoying it. And
do you remember Notion in 2018?
I didn't try it then, but not
Man
too far.
alive, yeah.
It wasn't good.
No, it wasn't good, but it was a startup.
Yeah.
I think when you're using a startup product, you have to expect that some things might not work quite as they seem. But you could see the vision there. No, I think honestly, with using SaaS products, for me, in the way that my mind works, I just need to know. I almost need to know which tool is used for which kind of information. So, like using Notion, for example, for FAQs, documentation that is going to last for some time but not going to change, is a really valuable place to keep information like that. Asana is obviously for day-to-day tasks and projects that you can like plan well in advance and then work out who's going to be responsible for what over time. We use Shortcut, which used to be called Clubhouse, unfortunately, for them. but is a fantastic dev tool that we use for everything that's product related, and then design is Figma. So like you almost just like think your way through those kinds of products in terms of and in terms of what kind of content they should have on there. Otherwise, you end up with searching through Slack for goodness knows what, and however many channels that exist.
Yeah. No, interesting. I'll take a look at Asana and see.
What do you use?
Well, Notion. I mean, I think I for my reminders, and to dos, I use Notes and Superhuman. But
Superhuman's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have
love the
recently been
reminders.
thinking about going back to Outlook, though.
Really?
Yeah, I know. Well, the thing is, Outlook Copilot.
Oh, really?
Well, obviously Microsoft has Copilot now, and interested in that. But largely speaking, I'm a believer in finding something that works and then sticking to it, rather than just changing to any new tool that exists on the market.
No, I agree. Well, I think especially in the world of SaaS, where it is so competitive and there's always new products, I like that philosophy. Great. And what piece of advice would you give an early stage founder listening to this podcast, and well, whether they're a founder or not, but considering an entrepreneurial journey?
Get to revenue as fast as you can. If you can, obviously it's not possible for all companies, especially if you're deep tech or health tech often, or biotech. But yeah, get your first customer before you start building the product. Not least when you go into conversations with investors, you'll have a lot of leverage. And one of the more powerful things that we were able to do when we did our round was we were balancing investors that were looking to come in with whether or not we should just bootstrap it and continue to go. And so it wasn't like those investors were even competing against each other, and they were, but like it was more that they were competing against us and what I wanted to do with the business, and how much I felt like that the cash that they were going to bring in would give us like that much acceleration. And that felt like quite a powerful place to be, even as a startup that had only been around for 18 months. So that's probably the advice I would give. I often speak to people who are thinking of starting businesses, and they talk about building the product first, and you just think, don't do it.
It's obviously risky. I mean, I think we were fortunate to have clients relatively early on, 3 months in, and that was on the actual SaaS platform. But
you also went cash positive pretty early on, right?
No. Well, I mean, I think you can. There are many ways to get cash positive, right? If you're by yourself, or
true,
or not paying yourself.
True.
But I think in hindsight, sometimes I just wish that I could just, now that I know what we need to build, could just put revenue and clients aside and just focus on building it.
Yeah.
But maybe that's just an ideal world that doesn't exist.
I think it depends on the business.
Yeah.
For
sure.
Depends on your access to companies, your price points, like whether the unit economics work for you. It just depends, I think, ultimately.
Yeah. There's no right or wrong way. Every way can work. You just need to, with persistence and time, get there. But
I think that's another really good point.
Yeah.
Like, persistence is pretty much the name of the
90% of it.
Yeah, right. Just keep putting one foot in front of the other together for a really long time, and you'll get there.
But well, Tom, thank you for taking the time.
Thank you for having me.
And is there a closing question that I should have asked you that I didn't ask, or
Not that I can think of. You asked me about my cooking, but no, I think you covered everything, mate.
Perfect. Well, thank you for being on the show, and
thank you.
Best of luck growing MVPR.
Thank you. Well, you'll know about it, so
I will.